Hello and welcome to another episode of Wicked Parley. Tonight we're going to be talking about control. Is it controlling to want to manipulate and hold other people? I don't know. We're going to find out that today. Alright, so before we jump too far into a whole bunch of other crazy stuff, I just kind of want to talk about next Saturday's episode, which I know is kind of crazy, but I'm going to let you guys know what it's about now, because I want you to be prepared with questions so we can have a discussion. Next Saturday, we're going to be talking about the paranormal. We're going to be talking about ghosts. We're going to be talking about experiences. We're going to be trying to ask some pretty generic but semi-in-depth questions surrounding the plausibility of the supernatural in those particular regards. So hopefully you guys stay tuned for that particular episode and you come with questions and we're able to kind of engage. And if you don't normally watch the show with anyone, or if you have friends who might be interested in that particular subject, grab them, force them in, say hi, bring it in. That way we get more people, more subscribers, more everything. So, okay. Without further ado, let's get into the particular topic, control. Now, before we even get crazy and down to the thing, I'm just going to say this right now. Control is not necessarily important. Or is it? Dun dun dun. Actually, no, I'm joking. It's not really that important, if I'm being honest. Like, when it comes down to it, control is a mindset, and so that's kind of like what we're kind of going with. And when it comes down to really analyzing a little bit about control, what it is, why might it be? One of the things that we're going to kind of discuss potentially a little bit is that the fact that it might be control is like a kind of like a holdover for an early state in our childhood, some part of our developmental past that's kind of like a holdover as we're transitioning from different levels of understanding. And as I'm sure most people are aware, when you're a child, there are certain things that you kind of latch onto. So, that particular thing is something that you might consider to be a level of at least a reason for why control might be present and why you might feel it. But I'm going to actually pose a question to the audience, and also Rose, feel free to answer if you have it or not. But do you think that the first time you had a sense of control was when you were a child or when you were an adult?
Just any sense of control, any at all?
Yeah, like some level of autonomy.
I think potentially middle school, when I kind of got to choose which clubs I wanted to join.
That's when you felt like you started to have control?
Just a wee bit. Like, of course, you have the limitations that the school provides. There's only so many clubs that a school can hold. Mm-hmm. Unless they're filthy rich, but that's another thing.
Okay.
But I got to choose the clubs that I wanted. It wasn't that my parents chose them for me. I went to the clubs because I wanted to.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely, honestly, I don't think I recognized control. I guess it's probably something I didn't even consider. I mean, my life. I was like, so control just was not something that was even something I would have even been aware of or considered. And I certainly don't think I feel like I was controlled from as far back as I can remember. And so I kind of I don't know exactly. I think maybe the idea of having autonomy might have been when I was probably 16, 17. And only because it was okay, I can kind of go out and go do whatever the hell I want to do. I'm not locked.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Okay. What about you? When was the first point where you were I recognized I'm being controlled?
I am being controlled?
Yeah. Was it young? Or, was it around the same time that you started to feel autonomy, or?
I think it was a little the official recognition that I wasn't fully in control, I think probably happened in high school because my parents had opened a restaurant in the last half of my freshman year.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my free time for the next essential decade after that was dedicated to helping at that place, which meant a lot of my clubs had to get dropped or limited. There was one club that I wanted to join but couldn't. And my parents, as much as I can understand, were very, very, very restrictive on times.
Okay. All right. Well, I asked the host has a particular response. Want to go ahead and read it, Rose?
Yes. So their response to our particular question is, the first time I felt I had control was halfway through senior of high school. I joined Acadeka, I think that's Acadeka, and became their de facto janitor. I had power. Wait, what? Okay.
All right. Well, I mean, that's interesting. That's definitely, I mean, it's kind of interesting to see that we kind of like all have different viewpoints. Like of when we started to see or sense those sorts of things. So that's kind of cool. And it kind of goes into the next point that I'm going to say is that a lot of psychologists have kind of thought that the idea and the sense of control as a concept is something that is kind of programmed sort of into us either by our culture or something that is like biological in nature, perhaps, that kind of guides our behavior. It's almost kind of like a, I guess like a gauge for how far or, like maybe without preventing yourself from doing over the top when it comes to certain concepts. Anyways, that's the general gist behind it. I guess I'm doing a bad job explaining that part. I don't know why I'm at brain fart right now. But control being a governor of basically between not enough and too much. That's the general gist. But yeah. What do you think about that, Rose? Do you feel like that might be something that you would identify with yourself and your experience?
Could you repeat that one more time?
Sure.
About, what?
Yeah, that
in particular.
Okay, that the idea, the conceptual idea for control, outside of just being a construct of our specific culture and our direct environment, might also be latched into some sort of biological drive that is a way of guiding our behavior, kind of being kind of like a barometer of of how far someone shouldn't take things or how not enough someone could take something to kind of gauge certain actions and keeping them kind of like on track.
So in short, is there some like biological aspect of this?
Yes.
Okay. I think so, if only because if I compare it to, animals in the wild or just life in general, there's a certain order to things. Sure, we can bring that control to, we think we're doing a lot more, but it might just be in our nature to continue because we have just this pathway that we keep following each and every time.
Mm-hmm.
It may change every once in a while, but we've all kind of just go along the same journey. You're born, you go through childhood, you go through teenage years, you go through your adult years until you die.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain goals that most people that I know of, at least, share in common, which was either, making sure you've got shelter, making sure you get food, making sure you have ways to just survive and live.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think there's some biological aspect.
There's a drive to protect yourself, kind of.
Yeah, the drive to protect, the drive to, make sure you live as far as you can.
Yeah.
And then I would imagine that with that biology, of course, there's like some people that go beyond the bare biology and some that have a little less, and that's why they can't either follow that quote control or just shoot straight past it and do a cartwheel into the void of life.
Yes. All right. Well, that kind of like goes into the next segment pretty nicely. And I think the next section is kind of like the idea is control a good thing or is it bad? And do we need to do something about it? I personally am under the opinion that control is kind of like one of those, like, I would say knife edge situations where it's very easy to go to one of the extremes, and any of the extremes are extremely bad. Like it's like a super narrow margin of where it's okay. Because I think that, like, people who are being controlled, they're going to be under a great deal of stress. Like there's some people that I know, they have gray hairs and they're in like their 30s. You know what I mean? Like they're like under incredible pressure, and it's causing them to age. And that's not cool, obviously. And
I
then
can imagine that's for some people being in control too.
yeah, I mean, definitely. If you're the one who's controlling other people, and people are not doing what you need them to do, then it can create stress and problems, and you're like, pull my hair out.
Don't get me started on that.
It's like, secretly, the reason why the patriarchy is real is because male pattern baldness exists.
Don't even.
I'm being silly here. It's like, oh, wait a minute, that's a great idea. That's a good point. Let's get them, guys.
Get him, boys, get him.
Oh no, God, no.
Anyway.
That's why you call them boys, not men. Okay. Anyways, yeah, but then, like, there's also, like, I think there's good elements of control too. It's not just negatives, right? Like you can have like a certain level of control that would help guide someone through particularly stressful or troubling circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
It can kind of create a, I wouldn't say like necessary. I guess structure is probably the best way to kind of like put it.
It's like a mentor system, kind of guiding you to when you can't figure things out or can't handle things on your own.
Yeah, I think so.
It's why you don't just have a child and put him out into the field like it's a Pokemon game. People are supposed to. That's what's happened. You're supposed to, guide the child until they're about like teenager and about 18, which is legal age, at least in America.
I mean, I would say that, like, technically speaking, that the age limit on that, in my mind, doesn't really exist. I think that if you're a parent, you're kind of like that kind of role for, like, the rest of your life. Because it's not like suddenly, like, yeah, if you're a good parent. It's not like suddenly you basically go, okay, cool, you're 18, out the door. I will see you never. Good luck. It's like...
That type of control is non-existent. That's
not really control. That's just
no.
that is abuse, and can create emotional damage. Sorry, I heard that like a little meme thing earlier, and it made me laugh super much. But yeah, okay. I see a host put a comment down. You want to read that?
Yes, I did ask a question to the audience about what is their opinion about control in general. And this is continuing off of our current discussion. Host says, control needs to be neutral. Many things are outside our control, but we hyper-focus that. But we rely on some control to want to change or maintain our way of life.
An interesting take. I don't know if I agree with the hyper-focus part. I think that more often than not, every person's going to approach their viewpoint in life differently. Very few people share enough in common with their viewpoints in life for them to be affected the same way. There might be things that are similar, but the way they're going to look at it, the way they're going to approach it, is going to likely be very different. I'm not going to say always, but let's say more often than not. And so I think the hyper-focus part probably is... I don't agree with that part. Just going to throw that out there. But it's not necessarily wrong. It's just... I just don't think that that's the right. But it could be.
Might be a case-by-case scenario for that.
Yeah, that's what I think. That's genuinely what I think, is it's case-by-case. But yeah, I mean, like, overall, though, I think you're probably right.
They do have a new comment, though.
Okay.
Control is a way of thinking. It doesn't exist, but we feel like it does. It could be an emergent property of change or seeing a string of cause and effect.
Oh, I strongly disagree with you. I think control very much does exist.
I'd have to think about that, so I'm going to just leave that be for now.
I'll actually break down my reasoning for it real quick. Okay, so first of all, let's take the example that you live in the United States.
Okay.
So the rules by which the society that you're occupying are written and dictated by people whom directly impact your life. So the local judge, sheriff department, local police, all of those people that would potentially, if you stepped out of line and broke a law, would come after you and prosecute you and put you in jail, all have controlling elements in your life. The sense that you have the free will, like that our previous episode, when we talked about does free will exist, this is a different concept. Similar, but it is a wholly different concept. And so, like, I would say that, like, just in the simplistic part that you have to obey laws, and if you drive a car, then you're obeying traffic laws. Those laws are being written. And in fact, you are being controlled because some city planner developed the roadways and the lines in the road that you follow to get to your destination. So, like, you are quite literally in multiple levels of control. And I think, you know, it is in some senses a viewpoint to how much you're willing to acknowledge it, but whether you acknowledge it or not doesn't mean that it's not present. That would be my basic conceptual argument for this. Mm-hmm. Only on the grounds of those things. I would say that, like, if you were going to be directly manipulated in a way that is going to affect the autonomy of your life, that's going to be a subjective experience based upon the interactions you have in your immediate vicinity, whether it be family, friends, loved ones, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, right? You know, significant other. That is going to be a different argument altogether. But control in its generic sense, if you live in the United States, you're in control. You are under the thumb. You break the law, you're still under control. You're still being controlled. So.
The wording is getting ridiculous here.
Yeah.
In control, under control.
I know, right?
Whew. Gotta rack my brain sometimes to figure out which type you're talking about. It's fine. It's one of those weird things about control.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. All right. So one thing that I think is kind of important is that what element of control is necessary to showcase the fact that people have autonomy in their life?
Let's see what we've got here. I mean, we've got these potentials.
Mm-hmm.
The elements of a good control system.
Yes, we do.
They state, let's see, let me see what the chat can see too. Feedback. Okay, no thank you.
No, your classes are not desired.
Your classes are not desired. No thanks.
Yeah.
No. Feedback. All right. Control must be objective.
Yes.
Prompt reporting of deviations. Control should be forward-looking.
Mm-hmm.
Flexible controls. Hierarchical suitability. Economical control. Strategic control points. Control must be simple to understand, nothing like a weird law. Control should focus on workers.
Yeah. Okay, I want to before we continue on this particular thing, I want to kind of address hosts' last two comments. You want to go ahead and read them?
Adds, that's authority. We follow rules because it's perceived as efficient. I can punch a cop, but it won't end well for me. Fear of authority may be a type of control, though.
Okay, so I'm gonna say there's two things you're mixing up here. Okay, so authority is the enforcing element of a controlling agent. So like no, like that the whole idea behind that is deeply flawed. And also, the last one is a phobia, not once again, not a control element, although it could be interconnected, as is authority is interconnected to control, but they are fundamentally different things. And you're talking about like the difference between the person who is essentially following the element of control and enforcing control's authority. That's why the cop's able to punish you for, punching them. So just yeah. Okay, so I just want to make sure we address those two things first, because I could see how it could be confusing to some, but no, I honestly it's not. I mean, okay, even think about it even more at a higher level of control. Let's look at a higher sphere of control, right? Okay, so we're going to be above the local law, right? Well, if you interact in any regard with any other person, right? You are reliant on that person to do something that you're trying to do, whether it be selling something, buying something, or just hoping that they're not going to do something nefarious to you. If you were to interact with them, then there's a sense of control in that situation because you're deciding how much interaction you're going to have, which is you acting your control on them. Their interaction with you is them interacting with their level of control. No, we did not define control. but that's because control is pretty straightforward. Like, it's a concept that I think we all understand pretty well. But if you'd like me to define it, we can.
Should I go ahead and find it?
Not quite. Unless he says so. Unless he wants to see it. Because,
Alright.
realistically, control is fairly straightforward. Anyways, okay, so we can jump back into this particular thing and kind of look at the elements of a good control system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, this particular article, right, it outlines a couple key points that Rose was lovely enough to read through, a few of them. And I think the ones we want to really kind of focus on are 1 and 2. And the reason why we want to focus on 1 and 2 specifically is because it's going to talk about essentially the whole point behind the control in the first place, feedback, right? Mm-hmm. And then the second is what's the objective of why do we even control in the first place, right? And it utilizes certain criteria, which I think is perfectly understandable if you put it into the terms of a local business as an employee, which makes perfect sense to me. Just like, to me at least, and maybe I'm totally wrong here, and Rose, if you don't think it makes sense, or someone in the chat who disagrees with me and says, hey, this doesn't make sense, then say something. But I think that the relationship between an employee and a manager and an owner of a business is very similar to the relationship that a civilian has with the police and local government. Like, you're going to be expecting a certain level of basic rules. You're going to have to follow those rules, and if you don't, you get punished. If you do, then you get rewarded. And so, to me, that they're very similar. They're the extremes are the parts that are different. Like with a job, you get rewarded by getting a paycheck, and if you don't do it, then you get fired, which means no more money for you. When it comes to law, you pay money for breaking the law, or you get incarcerated. Like on the worst end, right?
No, thank you.
Yeah, and if you do the right thing, then you have protection and security. All right, so there's give and take there. And in fact, that kind of transitions to the next major talking point, which is there give and take in controlling circumstances, whether it be a relationship, whether it be in a certain setting, regardless of circumstance, is there a give and take involved in elements of control? I'll go ask you, Rose, what do you think about that?
Is there a give and take in control? I believe so in most interactions, because you have to essentially give them, if somebody's controlling you, you kind of have to let that happen if you have a choice for the most part. There's the whole law enforcement, but you can choose to break them, it just might not end well.
Yeah.
So it's you have to kind of let these rules, you have to give yourself the chance essentially to follow these rules. You either follow them or you break them. If you follow them, you're letting them have some semblance of control over you. If you break them, you kind of reject that control.
Yeah, okay. I agree with you on that, 100%. I very much agree with that. You had a story that we were talking about off air about a sense of give and take and control. Do you recall it off the top of your head, or you want to think about it for a minute?
I believe so, about the one about the very negative give and take, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so a friend of mine, or a friend of a friend, it's a very confusing relationship tree here. So I'm just gonna go with friend.
Okay.
So when they were younger, their mother is pretty overbearing. Tried to control who they were hanging out with, what times they were home, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It gets to about which is relatively reasonable. I said relatively, depends. When you're like tiny child with no option to actually like do a ton of things on your own.
Mm-hmm.
But this time they're in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted to just hang out with their friends. They had been planning this hangout for like 3 weeks to a month.
Okay.
The day of the
Oh, sorry. That's a lot of plans.
that's a lot of planning.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So the day of the hangout, the mother knows that they're supposed to hang out, but continually gives him more chores anyway.
What a bitch.
And says he cannot leave the house until they are all done. And as soon as he's about to finish the last chore, 5 more get added.
Wow.
It got to the point where they were planning to hang out all day from in the morning until like evening, because they only had this one chance, which is why it took a month of planning.
Mm-hmm.
1 hour passed, 2 hours passed, 5 hours minimum had passed before he just straight up said, okay, I actually have to cancel, these chores are too much.
What kind of chores were they? I mean, like, this sounds like
They
a
were just
Harry
house
Potter.
chores.
Sounds like a Harry Potter level of chores.
I mean, pretty much, it was a bunch of house chores.
Jeez.
So that was just one example. Like, yeah, he has the roof over his head, and yeah, he's like getting allowance and stuff. But dang, the other time, he was getting a piercing, just a simple ear piercing, nothing too crazy. Like, it was just a stud.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, he used his own money, which is fine. Shouldn't be a problem, right?
Well, I mean, how old?
He's like high school age at this point.
Okay, gray area, but okay, continue.
I don't know about the whole gray area thing. Anyway, so he gets the piercing completely with his own money. Did not use any allowance or anything. He actually had a part-time.
Mm-hmm.
He gets home and his mom goes ballistic, saying that he shouldn't have gotten a piercing because it was supposed to be a family decision.
Okay, that's just fucking weird. That's here's why my only thought process to this whole thing is this. I have known people who were like 17 and went out and got like a gauge, like a fat ass hole in their ear, right?
Oh no! This one was a simple stud, as far as I know.
I know that, but I'm just saying, like, the reason why I say gray area is because, like, it's gray area because your example, in my opinion, totally fine. Getting a giant gauge that you can fit your thumb through without touching the ear is like a little crazy, right? So, like, yeah, there's a little bit of a difference there. That's why I say it's a gray area. So we're talking about control and macro scales.
That is from way before.
Okay, all right, cool.
So yeah, she decided that he was not allowed to wear the piercing to the point where it actually just healed over and closed the hole. And it got to the point where she was being kind of so overbearing and so controlling about who he was hanging out with, who he was talking to, who he could even like interact with. He kind of just ran away temporarily.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I kind of don't blame him for that. That seems crazy to me.
A wee bit. Like, I've heard of overbearing parents. That's pushing it.
Yeah, I can see that.
Sounds like beyond helicopter parent.
Well, it is definitely bad. That is definitely not a good story.
That's a give and take where it's like, it's a give and take that I would never be okay with, because sure, you have a roof over my head, sure, you provide me food and providing me help with education and stuff. That would make me miserable though.
Okay.
Ugh.
All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and address this host. So, actually, can you read what he says first?
Yeah, of course. So, we're talking about the last 3 comments?
Last comment specifically.
Okay. Control on the macro scale exists. We have choices that affect things around us.
Okay. So, what I'm going to specifically state is this. this particular episode is going to be discussing control on all levels, whether it be the macro scale, whether it be, you know, everything you can think of under the sun, all right? Like when it comes to this stuff. Because in my particular opinion, most people don't know the different scales of control that can be discussed. And so I kind of want to like kind of opening discussion when it comes to this, instead of discussing it from like one perspective that maybe not everyone knows, just kind of talking about it from a kind of generic purpose. And if people are interested in talking about it more, then we'll go in a little more in depth. I mean, because like we could easily discuss things like Lenin, for instance. We could talk about like some of the political theories around certain levels of controlling populations and things from those perspectives, which can completely go down a giant tangent. I mean, if you look at how the way in which the public in China is manipulated and controlled of how much internet they can use, you know, like what is okay to see. You know, apparently like femboys are bad, so you can't look at those. Yeah, I mean,
effeminate males.
Yeah, and like all those sorts of things all together are all problems of control that happen depending upon the region, and they can affect things on, you know, scales that encompass entire civilizations. And in fact, to some extent, that direct like ban affects the whole world. Maybe not in a huge way, but like enough of a way for us to be in America talking about it. So I mean, like that's, you know, it's a big deal. And so like I just want to make sure we're very clear when it comes to this. We're talking about like control on all things. And if future people who are watching this, if you have some ideas or questions about control, feel free to email the show, awickedparley@gmail.com, or check out the Discord, which you can send me a message and I'll respond. And hell, you might even be able to talk to me if you catch me on the right day. But yeah, we can talk about this more if anyone's interested when it comes to these things. But just know that that's what we're kind of going with on this particular episode. The next area that I kind of want to discuss is actually kind of ripped from an article. The article section itself is why are people control freaks, and it's from Psych Mechanics. And there's a particular section of it under psychology of controlling people. And it reads, an extreme behavior often satisfies an extreme underlying need. When people push themselves strongly in one direction, it's because they're being pulled by something in the opposite direction. Control freaks have a strong need to control others because they lack belief. They lack control themselves. So excessive need to control means the person is lacking control somehow in their own life. Now, I came across this particular article, and I came across a specific section of the article, and it made me think about the fact that some people who are going to experience control are going to, in fact, be the people who are going to do the controlling. But what motivates them to do that? Like, why does a person, you know, instead of, you know, just kind of doing things on their own, suddenly some switch happens and they're like, oh shit, I need to start controlling people. And then I was thinking about how abuse works, and that often people who are abused often abuse other people later in life. And it's cyclical, and it's an overall impact in communities, at least in the West. And this almost seems like control kind of works the same way. And I wanted to know, Rose, what are your thoughts on this?
Which particular aspect?
The idea that perhaps that controlling people do it in a cyclical way. Like, let's say hypothetically, you're a kid who is, you know, being helicopter parented by your parents, and then you get kids, and then you become a helicopter parent. Because there's certainly some people who say things like, oh, like, I'll never be like my mom. I'll never be like my dad. I'll never do these things. Mm-hmm. And how often do those people actually not?
Don't ask me about percentages. I'm all maxed out
Well,
today.
I'm not talking about percentages. I'm just saying, like, just if you had to take a guess, you know, no percentage, just a general guess. Do you think that's probably true more often than not, or
that they actually follow through, or that they fall into the same?
They fall into the
category
cycle.
as?
Yeah, they repeat the behavior.
I think people fall into behavior more often than not, especially the longer that it happens, the more likely you are to fall into it, because that's something that, as unfortunate it may be, you're relatively comfortable with that, as weird as that freaking sounds. God.
you
I
be,
don't, I like,
you
it's
become
so
you become
weird
comfortable
saying,
with it.
huh?
You think you could become comfortable with it?
Yeah, it's so weird. Like, you could become comfortable with the idea of it or like how it works, and that's really weird to think about for some aspects.
Yeah, it's kind of creepy. It kind of reminds me of like
Kind of.
certain other things. Like, yeah, never mind. We're not going there.
So it's easy enough to fall back into behaviors that you are comfortable with, even if it's not comfortable for others.
Mm-hmm.
But it also takes quite a amount of control in order to break that cycle. You need a lot of self-control to like keep yourself in check,
Mm-hmm.
which for some people is relatively hard to do depending on their circumstances. Like if it's way too stressful to try and keep yourself in control, people will sometimes break under the pressure and revert to bad habits
Mm-hmm.
or bad behavior. So that's what I think. Like, it takes a lot of level of control to break such cycles, and more often than not, due to pressures and stresses of life, some people might just fall back into it because it's what they're comfortable with, which is really unfortunate in a lot of circumstances.
Mm-hmm. I
What do you
wonder.
think?
I think I agree with you in a lot of ways, but I feel like I'm kind of more curious about like perhaps why might people find themselves in circumstances of them lacking control in their own lives. I mean, is it like they're in the presence of a domineering, authoritative, manipulative person who's controlling like their lives, and so they feel like they have to control other people's lives because if not, then they're so oppressed that they have no outlet. Or is there something else going on there? You know, I kind of wonder about that.
It could be that first one where you say they have like no outlet.
Hmm.
It could. I don't know if this probably ties into it, but because of the lack of control they had when they were under these circumstances, they might be overcompensating and try to exert too much control because of that
Mm-hmm.
overcompensation, which might be a possibility.
Yeah,
That's
maybe.
in line with your line of thinking.
Yeah.
Another one could be either because of life, because of, jobs or other people or whatever projects is currently in the works. I don't know. They might have too little control, such as if you're not the team leader or you're not the team manager at your work and you're just a follower.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of those circumstances, again, it might be an overcompensation of trying to gain some semblance of autonomy or control, and it just might be a very, very bad expression of them, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. That's very possible. Okay. Well, you know what? Let's turn this to the viewers, and let's leave you guys with this. What do you guys think about this particular question? Do you think that what things do you think could potentially go into a lack of control? You know, what makes a person go to that particular point where they become the controllee instead of, like a switch from control will be the one who's controlled to the person who's going to be the controller. Sorry, not controllee, controller. Yeah. What makes them do this? What's the thing what kind of tipping point do you imagine could be? Go ahead and leave it in the comments below. Email the show if you'd like. Make sure you go onto our Discord if you haven't already. If you're seeing this and you like what we got going on here, you like to hear more further discussions on random topics like this, then please subscribe and hit the like button if you liked it, and tell your friends. That's been the show. We'll see you guys all next Saturday, and hopefully you guys stay tuned for next Thursday's episode. Hope you guys are liking the content. Not sure, not gonna get too much feedback, but yeah. All right, man. Well, everyone have a great night, and I'll see you in the next one. Later, everybody.